I did.
Nice.
Welcome everybody to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. So happy to be here. We got, as always, a great group of people on Zoom. So welcome to Arlene and Ron and Larry, Jane, Stuart, and to Lou and Karen and Flossie and Genevieve. So happy to have you guys here. Welcome to everybody who's on YouTube as well. This will be our last class of the year because I'm out of town next week. And I hope everybody has a safe trip if you're going out of town. I know Flossie is already out of town, so I hope she is doing well. And looking forward to our discussion today. We decided for our last class of the year that we were going to do none other than witchcraft. So we're going to talk about it. I know a lot of people are interested in getting into the practice of it. That's why we're doing it, I think. Is that right?
Definitely.
That was a joke in case people didn't realize.
Got it.
But there are some groups out there of Jews who are interested in doing just that. So it's kind of interesting. And so we'll talk about that towards the end. But what we're going to talk about is we'll talk about a little bit of the biblical view of it. And then we'll talk about the more medieval view of it. And we'll talk a little bit about the vague area, which is a lot of it, because it's interesting to see that Judaism is very anti-witchcraft, but very vague on exactly what witchcraft is. And so that is one of those interesting dilemmas not dilemmas, that's one of the interesting dichotomies is, secondly, even though we talk about it quite a bit today, it is not something that Judaism speaks that much about it. I mean, we're going to talk about it. We're talking over several thousand years. It is not really one of the main topics of conversation in Jewish history. It is mentioned in the Bible and the Torah even. It is mentioned in the Talmud. It's mentioned in medieval. But it's really not talked about that much. We've probably talked about more today than in previous generations for a variety of reasons, obviously, because obviously there's more technology today, so we have access to all this information. And so it's really nice to see that we have more options, but also it makes it sound like we talk about all the time in Jewish history. So we don't. So first of all, and most importantly, witchcraft is not allowed in many respects. Biblically, it's very simple, not supposed to do it. It is a capital offense, although we've really only seen, I think, one time, maybe at all, anybody who's been prosecuted for being a witch. But in the Bible, in Exodus, Leviticus, and Sanhedrin, and the Talmud, it says it is forbidden. So what do we know if something is forbidden? You don't forbid stuff that doesn't exist. So if it's forbidden, that means there must have been a belief that it existed, because why would you do it otherwise? So that means right away we know there is a belief it exists. In Deuteronomy, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, a soothsayer, an augur, sorcerer, charmer, medium, wizard, necromancer. So it is forbidden to do these things. Other passages, and the most famous one is probably from the Exodus, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. In all the movies where they talk about people who are persecuting witches, this is the famous one. It's the one from Exodus. They always use the thou and shout. And so it's not you will not suffer a witch to live. They always say thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, because usually it's people who use thou in the actual modern context without being sarcastic are those who do. You shall not use enchantment. A man or woman that has a familiar spirit or that is a wizard shall be put to death through stoning. And so that is from Leviticus. So it's great. We know witchcraft is forbidden. It's very simple. Everything we're basically finished with the conversation, except for one little small thing. And what is the small thing?
What is witchcraft?
What is witchcraft? That's exactly right. The book of Micah says in the Messianic age, witchcraft and soothsaying will be eliminated. That's fantastic. We know it's wrong. We know when the Messiah comes, it's going to be gone. We've done everything except for say, what is witchcraft? And that is the dilemma, because we're never quite sure what it is. Why? Because there are many instances where prophets and sages use what we would call or seem like witchcraft. Even God, the parting of the wet Red Sea, the Urim and Turim, which are they're kind of like the priest has a breastplate, and in the breastplate he has these two things, probably some sort of dice, and you spin them and you roll them for divination and to sacrifice and for other things, except for rolling dice or rolling sounds like what? It sounds like, no, it's for divination. I'm rolling these, it's like gambling, but gambling with divination. It's like the priest seems to be doing witchcraft. Bread coming down from the heavens. If a woman is accused of adultery, she has to drink a mixture of dust and water with some prayers, and that will reveal her guilt or innocence. So we see that Moses and Aaron take on the sorcerers of Egypt. They throw down a staff, it turns into a snake, and Moses throws his staff and it turns into a snake. Not only that, his snake eats the other snake, which makes it seem like Moses's magic is
stronger
magic. That's why so Saul, after he has made witchcraft illegal, goes to the witch of Endor, the most famous witch in the Bible, one of the few instances where we actually see a witch in action. Saul goes to the witch, convinces her to do his bidding, even promises she won't be prosecuted. What does he want to do? He wants to talk to Samuel, who died. And he brings Samuel, and Samuel says, "Why are you bringing me up from the dead? I'm dead." And basically predicts, you're going to die soon. I told you that already. You think it's going to change because I died? And then Saul dies. So we see predicting the future. Prophets predict the future. So what is a diviner? What is witchcraft? Samuel had predicted the future by saying Saul was going to die and that another king would take over. So there is a lot of what seems like witchcraft. There's a woman ventriloquist, not in the Bible, but in part of the Septuagint. So the basic definition is hard to find. Usually it's like, if the power comes from God, then it's okay. If it doesn't, it's not. But everything comes from God. So it's more like, if it's sanctioned by God, then it's okay. Or if it's done for the right purposes. But what does it mean when you say for the right purposes? What's the problem with saying that?
Who determines the right purpose?
Exactly. Who determines the right purposes? So it's a very vague notion. It makes it more exciting because we do see these little instances all over the places. There's Ezekiel, obviously, who was probably tripping. References. There's references to some sort of voodoo he does. In Enoch, which is not part of the Bible, but is a contemporary book, they talk about how fallen angels teach witchcraft to their mortal wives.
Rabbi?
Jews, yes.
I was just going to suggest that a distinction might be that the witchcraft involves casting on others or doing for your own benefit. Because almost all of the examples you've given, which are really conveyances of what God's will is, in the sense, although, in some sense, everything might be, but they're not done for your own profit with an F. Whereas witchcraft might come under the definition of you're doing it for your own profit or your own benefit.
And that is certainly one of the things people talk about. Is it for your benefit or is it for the benefit of God? And that seems to be the prevailing sentiment. If it's godly inspired or godly sanctioned, it's okay. But again, us on earth, it's hard to determine that. And so, as we know, Jews were thought through the Middle Ages to be good practitioners of magic. There's not a lot of, despite the persecution of Jews, we weren't persecuted a lot for magic. But we do see this forbiddance of magic. And one of the things we see is that if it's connected with another group of people, it is wrong. Because in the Mishnah, it says, when you're doing magic like the ways of the Amorites, then it's wrong. So while there are instances where sages in the Talmud are given powers in the moment, that is okay because it is sanctioned by God. But then you have people like Maimonides. What do you think Maimonides, after talking about him, says about magic? Maimonides is very anti-magic, 100%. Magic is wrong across the board. Why? Because he's a proponent of logic. He is Spock. And magic, now remember, we're not talking about magic of birth. The magic of a birth is not, that is God using natural law to create life. We're not talking about, so if it falls within the strand of within logic or science, then it's not considered magic to Maimonides. So, but if it goes against the natural laws created by God, then it is magic and it would be considered illegal. So that's another way of looking at it. So generally speaking, and I think I read it best in an article I was reading about this when discussing whether magic is okay or not. And let me see if I can find the quote. It's a perfect quote for this. Let's see if I find it. It's basically, I can't find the quote. Magic is used to describe the rituals and religious practices of people I don't approve of. So if it's magic, it is wrong. If it's ritual, what I do, it's right. So magic is what the other people do, so it's wrong. Jane.
Is fortune telling considered that? And
Absolutely, and that is a good question.
Because the fortune teller could say, I have this power, it was given to me by God. The person who uses the fortune teller is just as guilty because they believe it or don't believe it, but they believe, why would they be going there?
And that is an excellent example because seeing the future is considered wrong. It's part of magic. However, who predicts the future? The prophet. That's what a prophet does. The prophet has a glimpse of the future to teach people how to behave. But if the prophet does it, it is okay, sanctioned by God. If it's somebody who doesn't, it is not. And we're not talking about false prophets. False prophets don't have this power. Larry.
Would you also distinguish between, let's say, magic in the pre-rabbinic era compared to the rabbinic era? Since
Oh
this
yeah, I mean, again, in the Bible, so the rabbinic era, well, we can separate that. So in the Bible, again, we get the general don't do's, but the very vague explanation of what it is.
the point I wanted to make really was that there seemed to be so much magic coming out of the Shtetl era.
Right, and we're going to go over that in a second. Exactly.
And I have a story about my grandparents that I wanted to share.
Let's
later.
hear it.
Well, my grandfather and grandmother were immigrants here, and they came from what was called the Empire of Russia at the time, which probably was part of Ukraine or who knows where it was from. But at any rate, when they came to the United States, Oxy, which was most of the Jews in the sort of Lower East Side or the Brownsville area of Brooklyn did as well. My mother had gotten sick at the time. And even though they were very Orthodox people, I remember, and I could have been less than 10 years old or something. It was a mysterious kind of trip that we took one night. Either my uncle, who was a doctor, actually, a medical doctor, took us in his car because not that many people had cars. And we went to another part of Brooklyn, which I was totally unfamiliar with. And my mother was there who had been ill. And they talked to a lady, and the lady broke a few eggs in front of us. And that was kind of the ritual in which she was almost looking into a crystal ball to try and divine the future. And it was just a very, very strange occurrence. And, as you get to be my age, you start thinking back on,
Right. How cool.
In your childhood, yeah.
These
And,
Michigan.
Michigas kind of.
Right.
And,
Did your mother get better?
no, actually, well, unfortunately, about 10 years later, she passed away when I was 16. But I don't remember how old I was with this particular instance. But it just seemed to me to be really an odd situation of, probably something that they had from their shtetl while they were in Europe and just brought over to the United States. And it just went side by side. And I mean, it wasn't unusual even in the United States for when the Catholics tried to convert a lot of the Native Americans here.
Right.
They allowed them to continue, most of their rituals. At the same time, we were in Hawaii one time. I remember on the beach in Hawaii, and they come out in hula dresses and do the ceremonials and do certain chants. I'm sure that the Catholics were not in favor of, but yet in order to embrace them into the Catholic religion. So there's a lot of stories of other religions as well. Embracing things that are not understood as witchcraft.
And again, in Judaism, what we see a lot of the more talk about witchcraft comes from because a lot of people in the Christian world and became such a big part of the Christian world. And let's go a little bit, and we'll get to the Baba Mises and the shtetl in a little bit. But for a long time, when you think of witchcraft, do you think of men or women mostly? So because
I was thinking about that
Women.
because all the witches seem to be women.
Exactly. So it really became more of a women's, not strictly, but certainly more that women were known more for witchcraft than men. In fact, the only time the punishment of death has been given has been to a group of female witches. And this is really interesting because somebody like Shimon Bar Yochai, who is considered to be the writer of the text for Kabbalah, the Zohar, although probably wasn't, he used the evil eye to kill a bad guy one time, but that's okay because he did it because he was given the power by God, so it comes from God, so it's okay. And the only time that there was an actual killing of witches is this Rabbi Shimon ben Shetta killed 80 witches by, it's hard to know exactly, but he kind of was able to bring 80 men and they lifted them in the air and that took away their powers and they burnt them. And so that's the only time that witches are given the death sentence. because even though there's some connection to demons, it's not always about demonic possession. A lot of it is about, doing things that are not as bad as we might think, love potions or cursing somebody. Although there is a very strict law against using witchcraft to kill somebody or curse them seriously. So that's kind of like the only thing across the board that you're not supposed to do. But, you have everything from cursing somebody so they'll go bald. I mean, that's a very popular curse.
Now I understand.
Yeah, so who did you guys upset?
I don't know. No, it was before Karen.
So it
Say
wasn't
that
Karen.
again.
So Karen didn't do it to you. Okay, good to know.
Hey, Uncle, I want to
Well,
hear
look
what,
what the two broken eggs that woman did to Larry.
I know. And what happened was Ron and Jeff must have gone to the same egg person.
Rabbi, say Eikavalt again. I
Are you
want
telling us? Are you telling us that witchcraft is real?
I'm telling you that some of you guys are bald, is what I'm saying. I'm saying I'll be bald pretty soon too. But yes, again, according to Judaism and according to anybody, you don't make something illegal unless it exists. So yes, there is no doubt that witchcraft is mentioned many times. So it is believed to be real, and that people can find this power, and that using it in certain ways is wrong. And using it in certain ways may be considered okay if you're doing it on behalf of the Jewish people, if you're representing God. There's a story about Rabbi Eliezer, who uses his power to keep a house from collapsing. There are rabbis who create cows out of thin air for Shabbat dinner. There are, of course, rabbis who create the golem, which is the most famous of all of the acts, which is a much more recent one. So what they're concerned with often is not the magic, but as Stuart, I think, said, the intention of the person performing the magic. Okay, so often when you say magic, it's used in derogatory forms because you think the person is doing something they're not. But if you do it yourself, it's not really magic, it is godly support. So that's obviously often according to the point of view. What are some other things that are very famous? And that, of course, is the spirits, the demons, which really are more of a, Western 16th, 15th century, as it becomes more popular in the Christian world, the Shadim, which is the Jewish spirit that can take over and use our bodies to do things we shouldn't. There are spells and incantations to use to prevent them from taking over your body, because they can use, these are not just mischievous ones, these are ones that can be quite violent. Mischievous ones are more famous. Then there are even books of magic or of mystery. The most famous is the Sword of Moses, Harbad de Moshe. There's the Sefer Azim, which is the book of mysteries that actually has spells using ritual practices, Jewish practices. Not only that, some rabbis allowed them to have, as long as they're not calling upon evil spirits to hurt people, it was okay to do this stuff. It wasn't like legal. It's kind of like, the guys selling marijuana on the side. We know it. It's a little bit of marijuana. I'm just going to let it go. As opposed to this person is dealing crack and I'm going to arrest him. Larry.
Yeah, they tried to add some legitimacy to it by saying that it came, that if it came, the magic or the prophecy or whatever the warnings or whatever came out of the magic came from a person that was, let's say, mentally deficient. That this was more authentic. As a matter of fact, even I don't know if anybody here has been to Delphi in Greece, which is kind of a center for, where people would go to try and pray to the individual Greek city-states. And Aristotle, of course, was part of that, which Maimonides admired Aristotle and Greek thought, and they were at the height of Greek thought. But yet they would go there, and the magic that even Alexander at the time, came to there to get the prophecy was they would they would take some young girls, they had to be virgins, and that they gave them all sorts of herbs apparently before they went into the temple, and they were all kind of heightened up on these drugs and things of this, like an LSD kind of thing, and in our world here, and they would be able to divine the future. But even in the shtetls, I think there was this idea, and you see it in certain books and certain movies, fictionalized about what happened in the shtetls, about how people would go to certain people there who had this divining kind of power because they possibly were the oddball of the community or something. So I think they felt that these people were touched by God somehow, and that were, ultra religious, and that they had a special relationship.
And I think you're right. I think a lot of these people who looked to that were strange. They may have been, socially different. There's a belief that some of them may have been housing some sort of demons. The egg thing, by the way, that you're talking about, I think I've heard of the egg thing. It's more though used for love, to love spells, but it's nice. It's also used apparently to healing, which Larry was just mentioning. But all of this is true, again, if it's not used for a wrong thing, if it's used considered coming from God, then it's probably considered okay in many respects in some places. So also it was used a lot, especially in what Larry said, probably in healing practices. I mean, you'd go to somebody who had healing abilities. And what you don't see in Judaism that often is what you saw in the Christian world, and not in America, but in other places, the burning of witches, the actively seeking to kill them. That we didn't have a lot in Judaism. You have people like Maimonides who are very much against it, but you didn't have these witch hunts that you see in Christianity. It just wasn't as popular in Judaism to do this, because witches, if they were usually probably doing simple things like love spells or healing spells, and they weren't really cursing people or doing terrible things. So it was really most of the time just let go. We don't see a lot of this killing and burning of Jewish witches. Stuart.
It provides an interesting thought. In Judaism, there is not a really well-defined sense of a source of evil. In Christianity, it's clear that, or at least Christianity of the earlier eras, it's clear that the source of good was God, and anything or any power that came not from God was evil, because you had this whole idea of fallen angels, of hell, and of a devil. So there, in Christianity, you could assign all witchcraft or all evil to some non-godly force. You can't do that in Judaism because there is no ungodly force.
And that's probably the main reason that is exactly what happened. There were some places witchcraft was denounced in the Jewish world, but you're right, we don't have this devil character who was, we had the Dybbuk, who came in and might take over somebody's body, but that often was a way to excuse somebody as opposed to killing them. Somebody did some terrible things, the Dybbuk was in them, that is not their fault. Their body was taken over. we excise the demon and the person is now, where in the Christian world is we have to kill the person. It was just now, not that that didn't happen in the Jewish world. There were some very renowned rabbis. The Baruch Spinoza's guide, Manasseh ben Israel, was known to have endorsed witch hunts, not in the Jewish world, but in the Christian world. He was known to have supported them. But generally, Jews tried to stay out of the witch hunts because if they supported them too overtly, eventually they were afraid people would turn on them. So we generally stayed out of it. But the Dybbuk especially could be used as an excuse for somebody who went crazy and did something terrible. The person was taken over. Possessed, thank you. And that could be an excuse for, mental illness. And mental illness, as we know, if you're considered mentally ill in Jewish world, that means the punishments are less severe. Although generally speaking, we also did not have capital punishment in Judaism. I mean, the story of the 80 witches, but the only person we know of in Jewish history that was punished legally by a court and given the death sentence. Remember Pinchas killed the man and woman in the Bible because he was dating a non-Jew, but there was no court that said you're guilty. The only time that has happened in Jewish history is, of course, Eichmann in the 60s in Israel. Israel does not have capital punishment except for extreme, cases of genocide and such forth. So we don't have a history of killing people for witchcraft or for even murder or at all in our world. It's just not a thing that we've had. So what we do see, though, is the farther you are from modernity, from a modern technological society, the more witchcraft becomes part of your world. Again, and we see that if you're living in modern America or the Golden Age of Spain or Europe in the modern world in the 19th and 18th centuries, there's less of this witchcraft. But if you're living in places where science is not king and you're repressed, or in places where education is not as, then it becomes a lot more popular. And of course, the most famous would be the Eastern European, the shtetl evil eye type of thing, where it became to the point where there are a lot of rituals. And one of the reasons we talk about so often is because the last vestiges of that world, we still have a connection with. It's like baseball or sports. Everybody can tell you who Babe Ruth is or who Michael Jordan is. But if I'm watching sports in the 80s, I'm going to know all the regular players. Whereas if I'm studying history about the 1980s, I'm going to talk about Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, the famous people. But if I live during that period, I'm going to know the people on the bench. So if we're living in a time period where we have some connection to, we're going to know a lot of these rituals. Karen.
I was just thinking when my son was born, which was 1967, my one grandmother, who came from a shtetl in what is now Poland, was insistent that I put the red ribbon on the crib. I don't know if anybody else had, you've heard that one, haven't you?
Oh,
that
yeah.
was off the evil eye. And it was, I thought it was a Bubba Mice, which of course, but she just made sure that I did it when she came to the house. So.
Yeah, and again, that became what the evil eye became a very popular omen, not only in the Ashkenazic world, but in the Sephardic world as well. It's one of those unique moments where both, the Hamsa, for instance, is not just an Ashkenazic tradition. Warding off the evil eye became very popular. Medallions that are still used today, people don't realize. Just like walking under the ladder became a Western or modern thing. We had the salt in the the salt in the pocket or the salt around the bed. That was a very popular one. The red ribbon obviously is very well known. There are a lot of those traditions out there. And once you get into a more modern, technologically savvy society, instead of putting the ribbon on the bed for the safety of the baby, you get a good doctor and you get the baby medicine and you cuddle the baby and you do the things that they teach you. Whereas if you don't have access to this tradition, you go back to what you think will work. And again, there's so many stories about how modernity encroaches on this world of mystery. But that's not to say in Judaism we don't have things like vampires and werewolves and spirits and magic. I mean, we had some of those things. They used hair and feces and saliva and gemstones and salt to do incantations. There was this kind of magic in certain places, depending on where you were. And even so, in 100 years, when they look back at this age, they'll look at some of the things we do and say it looks almost like magic, curses, and such forth, because it's a different age. But yeah, Larry.
Yeah, I belong to a film group, and I'm presenting something on Hamlet next week. And the ghost of Hamlet is particularly interesting because it occurs during the Renaissance, which is a period of new learning and things of that nature. So you'd think that a lot of this would have gone away. And one of the critics that I was reading made some very interesting observation. It was really recently that there was a Protestant Reformation in the 1500s, and Hamlet was written in the late 1600 or thereabouts. And apparently the Christians under Catholicism, believed because there was a central authority, there was somebody that they looked to for all the answers. There was a certainty about life. Then all of a sudden, Protestant came along in England as well as in Germany and other countries, and this certainty kind of went away. And in order to fill some of the gaps of certainty, then they kind of embellished some of the, or embodied some of the ideas of whatever the local chapters of Catholicism, whether it was Puritanism or the extreme parts, or whether it was the more liberal parts. And Judaism, obviously, in the shtetls, the major example that we see it in our lifetime is the Fiddler on the Roof, where she has that dream, about Laser Wolf. She shouldn't marry, which is, I think, a fantastic scene that they put into that, and dreams and visitations of, she's not a ghost, but she's somebody that you think about. So dreams, I think, are a big part of it. And she's nobody special. I mean, she's a housewife. She obviously has a motive, for trying to express this. But it's just, I think, a brilliant use of witchcraft type things by a normal person to try and get their opinions across.
Yeah, poor Laser Wolf's never getting remarried. With a Frumacera cursing everybody. But yeah, and again, we did have it like the Christian world. There wasn't as harsh a reaction to these people. There are, again, Genevieve asked about Solomon's seal. I mean, going all the way back, there is several things that make it difficult to find the difference between whether it's magic or sanctioned by God or magic that's not sanctioned by God. Again, it's a very fine line sometimes. But
I don't know who could buy into this whole idea of amulets and whatnot. It seems so silly to me.
Well, considering I have one right there and one right there that were given to me, it's to some it's ridiculous, and to some it's not.
I got it.
Some put it up there because it's a historic piece. I mean, some would say the mezuzah we put up on our doors are, some sort of, for Jews in certain ages, the mezuzah is an amulet of protection. That's why we have the Shema there. Larry.
What did Bob Cousy say? I think it was Bob Cousy who went to Holy Cross, so obviously a Catholic school. Foul cross himself, and he says it still doesn't help unless you got a good foul shot.
That's right. And speaking of sports, Wade Boggs, who was a very good player and Hall of Famer, I think boiled chicken before every meal for his 20-year career. That's a lot of chicken.
A lot of chicken.
Yeah. So again,
It's better than wearing the same underwear for a winning or a losing streak.
that's right. Or did anybody see Bull Durham where he wears women's underwear and he can't have sex during a winning streak? So again, we still use these things. I mean, how many of us sit in the same chair when watching a game, or or assume that our team loses because of our bad luck?
Where does which superstition end and witchcraft start?
That is a very good place because we do not know. I hate to say it, but it's a very vague place. Superstition and witchcraft, they're also convoluted and mixed in together. Today, it really often depends on society itself. Judaism very simply says it's not allowed, but then looks the other way in certain cases, and in certain cases says it is allowed if it's sanctioned. So it's a very... Go ahead, sorry, Stuart.
I was just going to say, and then there's another split that is, I don't believe this nonsense at all, but I do have the amulet kind of thing. And the truth is, not this particular one, but I use amulets. I wouldn't be without a mezuzah. I'm not sure.
Some of the mezuzahs not.
This is another distinction.
Right. The amulet, the mezuzah is supposed to remind us of God, not be an amulet of protection. But for some people, I have this amulet over here. Let's see it back there. It's a Hamsa.
Uh-huh.
And then there's another thing with some kind of a word. So I was, complaining of my mother after she died. We're cleaning out her house, and she had so much stuff. Talking to my aunt, my father's brother's wife, and talking about all the stuff she had in her house. I'm like, and look at this, this crap I have. I've got this amulet and this thing, and they're just terrible. And she says, I gave that to your mom for a Hanukkah gift. It's like, okay, so now I have it up here. She's like, that's not crap. That's beautiful. I was like, okay, that was the wrong thing to say. So now I have it in my office. So, Lou.
What about?
I'm sorry, Lou, and then Genevieve.
I don't know. I think this would be Stuart. That was nice. You brought up superstition. I think this would fall more under superstition than witchcraft. But I had a girlfriend who was raised very religious. If something bad happened, she'd go, toot, toot. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, that may be the most popular one. The poo-poo that was done for it's still done in some circles, and we're aware of it.
To ward off something evil?
Exactly. Oh yeah, it's basically like saying, oh, this kicker always makes every field goal. It's like poo-poo, you just jinxed them. So that poo-poo was a very major part of Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. And, once in like 30 years, it will become more legendary, more like forgotten and read, because there'll be nobody living who remembers people who did it. Whereas there are still people today who remember people came over from Eastern Europe or were first generation Americans who were copying their parents, where that has kind of disappeared. But the poo was a very, very big part of.
So would you call that a superstition?
I would call it a superstition. Some would call it magic even. I mean, you are saying an incantation to keep something bad from happening. Yeah. And it probably originated as that. Genevieve.
Oops. I was thinking about the home blessing on the Hamsa that I have. I have a couple of them around my house.
Right. And again, for us, blessings are nothing more than blessings, but for some people in certain ages, they may have meant more. There's a fine line between all of this. And again, it makes it more interesting.
Genevieve also mentioned in chat the Star of David.
Yeah, the Star of David, which is not an ancient symbol going back to the Bible, but we do know it's been around for 2,000 years, but only really been the main symbol of Judaism probably for the last couple of hundred years. We saw, in the Bible, you see.
But we wear it. I wear it. A necklace is kind of like an
Yeah, a
amulet.
lot of people do. It's very popular. You see things to the level of Elijah and Elisha bringing back the dead, or giving somebody unlimited amounts of oil or wine so they can sell it and make a living. But it's in the name of God, so it's okay. So again, often it is, if you're doing it for the right purposes, if it's in the name of God, then it's okay. If it's what I'm doing, it's okay. But if it's what you're doing, it's not okay. There is a very, very, very difficult line sometimes to follow. But it makes it more exciting.
People probably wear the cross as like an amulet of protection as well.
100%. How many of you seen, what do you do with a cross and a werewolf? And a cross in a vampire. Yeah. That's right.
I had that, but the vampire said to me, "Goodness helping."
Yeah, that's why they had the movie was I think Saturday the 14th, where he uses the Jewish star, and it doesn't work. But
holy water.
Holy water. There was a show called, I forgot what it's called, where the werewolf is Jewish. And he used the Jewish star to ward off the vampire, because if you're Jewish, the star works. If you're Christian, the cross works. So, it's really makes it so. Do these things exist and work? Who are we to say it doesn't? Who are we to say it's hard to tell? Most of us don't believe in most of them, but that doesn't mean we don't believe some of them work. So it's just really who you are, where you are. If we were living in an age of less technological advancement, less freedom, where we felt a lot more powerless, then we would probably be more conditioned to supporting these things. Look at Savannah. Savannah gets 50 million tourists a year. Big part of it is because of the famous, voodoo stuff that went on here from the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. So
also, oh crap! Oh, I was thinking, and a lot of things in chemistry and science, we can't really see them anyway. When it comes to particles and energies and whatever,
exactly.
So there could be stuff that we don't understand. Kind of like if you took a flashlight to a tribe in the middle of Africa, they might see it as magic, but to us, we just know it's a type of science or technology that we already understand.
Exactly. And that is exactly what often these things are. So it's really cool and interesting. There's some great books out there. Obviously, the most famous is the story of the golem. There's several stories from there. A lot of time, magic, and if not used for simple things, goes astray. If magic is used for bigger things by inexperienced people, it almost always goes astray. That's pretty universal. But again, it's forbidden, but most of it, you kind of look the other way. And I think Stuart's idea that we didn't have the devil in Judaism or Satan makes a big difference. Stuart, we'll finish with you.
Actually, it's not to finish. I wanted to ask everybody if they can think of examples. How much has witchcraft and this whole kinds of magical thinking slipped into common language? You said that you think this idea of poo-poo is likely to disappear. I don't agree, because it seems to me that's going into the relatively common language. To use a basketball example or a sports advantage example is, don't say this guy never misses a field shot.
Right.
And somebody says to him, don't do that. Don't poo-poo it.
Right.
And that's become a pretty common.
And if it becomes a pretty common thing, it may become, some of them do. I think a lot of them are lost. I mean, I think there are a lot of them, and throughout the ages, they disappear. And if you don't pass them along or you move somewhere else, so some of them have made it to this time period. Some of it get into the vernacular, and some don't. It's impossible. But you're right. If we look at the background of a lot of the superstitions, then and sometimes even things we think aren't superstitions are. You don't go swimming after you eat. I mean, that became a superstition for a lot of people when I don't think it is a thing. So
Hey, don't poo-poo that.
yeah. So there's a lot of things that we thought were legitimate medical things, but they're really more superstition. Yes. Was that, sounds like
Larry?
Yeah.
Yes, it is Larry. Okay, there you go.
I know some people are going to leave. I just wanted to mention something on another subject. And on PBS, we saw a special last night, which was how the Jews celebrated and then Christmas, which I would highly recommend.
How the Jews, could you say that one more time, Larry?
The Jews reinvented Christmas.
Oh,
and,
really?
Irving Berlin de-Christianized Christmas to make it more of a secular holiday, and the Rudolph the Reindeer thing with the nose and things of that nature. But if you get a chance to see it, it's a marvelous documentary. It's an hour on PBS. I'm sure it's being replayed if you go on your guide to look at that thing.
Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to mention is
That's awesome. I'm going to see that. Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to mention was maybe for next year. There is so much going on now in Israel, and even here on recently in Brown University, and some anti-Semitism is spiking again. And there's a possibility now of an extended truce, or not truce, but ceasefire, or whatever you want to call it, in Israel.
1 week. 1 week.
I was wondering if we could start off the new year next year with a discussion of, an update kind of on Israel.
Oh, that's a great idea. And I think we're going to have somebody came up with a great idea of having a discussion here during services. I think we're going to do it in February.
Okay, great.
Also, but yeah, I'm happy to, if you want to start, we're not going to have class next week. I'm out of town, or I'll be leaving that day. So, but if you want to do it on the first class in January, we can do an update on what's going on in Israel.
Yeah, I think there's just so much happening at this time. Within the next week or two, there's going to be a lot of, even more information about it. So.
Yeah, I think there will be. All right, cool. So we'll do that. And, things change so quickly in the world, so you never know what's going to happen.
There could even be a two-state solution with the, with the number of settlements that they have in Israel.
I was talking about football. My brother's a Raiders fan, and 1 week they scored 0 points. The next 4 days later, they scored 63. So you never know what's going to go on. Yeah. But in the world as well. So, but I hope everybody has a great new year. We will be having services, obviously, this weekend. If anybody is interested in volunteering for Christmas Day or Christmas Eve at First Presbyterian Church babysitting, let us know. Unfortunately, I used to do it, but I do it on Easter now because I go spend Christmas with my mother-in-law. But I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday. Enjoy New Year's.
We had heard something about that happened recently at the temple. Are you prepared?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sure. There was a bomb threat. It was sent to hundreds of locations around the country over a couple of days. And we got one of them here on Sunday morning early. So we basically we canceled Sunday school. We had the police come by, the sniffing dog come by. We got the building checked out. Ironically, I was teaching that day at the church next door about anti-Semitism and the issue in the war in Israel. But it's not considered a serious threat because it seemed to have just randomly used some sort of computer program to pick emails of institutions from their hundreds of them in the country over a period of 5 or 6, 7 days. So they didn't think it was a serious threat, but we did. We made sure to check everything out and everything was fine. But, it doesn't take much to send an email to a bunch of people, So it's sad. I mean, the amount of money one email could cost. Just getting the police and the dogs here and from all around the country, and it doesn't cost us anything, but it certainly takes their time. So it's unfortunate. But what we are seeing is a lot of support in the Jewish community. Unbelievable, especially after the the publicity of the three presidents of the universities and their rhetorans too. I think you're seeing a lot more people coming to understand. I don't know if they're supporting Israel anymore, but certainly supporting the Jewish community and America a lot more. And really nice, unequivocal support. I had a lot of support for Israel. And even in the Jewish community, there's debate as to what we should do with this war. But I think I'm finding a lot of support for Israel, the country, still.
Yeah, the 3 hostages that were shot recently by Israeli.
Yeah, that was not intentional. That was
and the way Israel are thinking about the war and things. That's what I was kind of alluding to.
Yeah, that was really. I mean, again, obviously, if you're in the middle of war and you see that happening with white flags and you suspect something, and that was a tragedy. I mean, it was not intentional, though. Unfortunately, that happened. But wish everybody all the best.
Thank you, Ed.
And
Thank
you.
you.
I'm gonna miss you guys. I'm gonna be doing doing officiating an Indian Jewish wedding, so that'll be a lot of fun. So and hope you guys have as much fun as I do, because I doubt it, because I'm going to be doing an Indian Jewish wedding in New Orleans. I mean, I don't know what you're doing other than
It's gonna be
that.
fun.
Give us a rundown on that.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Interesting. I was just discussing with them some of the Indian traditions I'm not very familiar with, and it's very interesting.
Is it a Hindu? When you say Indian, Hindu?
No. They're a Jewish. The daughters from our congregation. The bride, the groom is from his family's from India.
But they're Jewish.
And they're Jewish, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, so it'll be very nice.
That should be it.
It'd be interesting if you would, for us, keep an eye on things that are not typically Jewish in the wedding, because I would be very interested to see how many Indian traditions have crept into that kind of a service.
Yeah, and we were just talking, trying to find the balance. One of the things that he is going to do is he's going to sing as he walks down the processional. So he's sing a version of Yigdal, like a second part of Yigdal.
Mhm.
I hadn't heard the song the way I hadn't heard that tune before, so that'll be interesting. Obviously, he'll be wearing, I think, some Indian garb.
Well,
So there's going to be a mixture of things, but they're
Yeah.
also doing a
Yeah.
full Indian ceremony on Thursday night, and then the reception is the next day. It's not after the wedding, so that'll probably be Indian as well. So it'll be very interesting.
Any elephants?
That would be awesome.
the Hindu
They
wedding.
use a white horse.
I was gonna say the groom rides in on a white horse. Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if they're doing that or not. That
I
may
don't.
be.
That's. Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing Thursday because I'm only officiating. I'm going to it. They wanted us there for it, but I'm officiating for the Saturday part.
Yeah. And the bride off is generally in an Indian ceremony, henna tattoo.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. On her hand.
I think
Yep.
they're doing that on Thursday or beforehand.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think my wife's going to do that as well if she's allowed.
We did. We had it done when we were in India. It was fun. No,
Yeah.
In India. Yeah. That was
In
fun.
India.
Yeah. Cool. We went to a Hindu wedding when we were in Nepal.
That might have been awesome.
It was a very interesting experience. We got invited to this wedding. It's a long story, but anyway.
I'm married in India, a Korean girl, and we separated the ceremony, and it's officiated by a rabbi. They went to court to this particular rabbi in New Jersey, for training. She was really non-religious. Christian was really non-religious. But then the second part, they all went back and came in the Korean garb. They're doing the whole red hanboks.
That's awesome.
Korean dress kind of thing. I'll try and get a few pictures to show.
Yeah,
you.
we'll see. I'm looking forward to it. And the bride and groom were just sweetheart, and I'm good friends with the bride's parents as well. So that'll be
And the
extra
photo
nice.
we had.
With the palace on the top.
Well, you guys have a good one. I will give you updates on the Indian wedding when I get back, and also we'll talk next month about. And then we got a lot of stuff in January. We are going to have after the annual meeting, we're going to have a concert benefiting Israel. Ben Warsaw.
Oh, cool.
Now professor at Georgia Southern is going to play. And we've got guests. We have a scholar in residence in February.
Mhm.
We're going to have a speaker talk about on MLK weekend. We decided this year to have some people who grew up in Savannah talk about what segregation and civil rights was like as a Jewish person living here during that, because we usually hear it from the perspective of Jews coming from the north who are doing the protest, but what was it like living here? All right, guys, stay safe, everyone.
Happy and a healthy New Year. to
Happy New
everybody.
Year, to everybody, and
Everybody.
enjoy.
Be
And I'll
well,
see you.
have a good year.
I'll see you in a few minutes, Rabbi.
I'll see you in a few minutes.